Welcome back to the garage. So what's the diff? Well, what is the difference between the diffs? That is the real question. The difference is how they work. Now, we have a pretty cool example today. We have basically all types of diffs on the table today. We have 4 separate diffs that do something completely different, but all in the same way. And what I mean by that is they all drive your car, they all move your wheels, but some of them will have an open differential, a lock differential, or a mechanically locked differential. So how these all work, and if you're not familiar, these are all from Super Duty axles or Ford F250, 350, that type of application. So these 2 on the bench right here, the one on the right that is from a 03 F350, and that one is from a 2017 F350. This one is a Sterling, I think you leave it at the 10.5 axle. That one is from a Dana M275 axle. And then in the rear, we also have, it's basically the same thing as that one, which is a Sterling ARB air locking differential. So it's a 35 spline in here and a 35 spline in there, so this is the same one. And by spline, I mean, if you look down in there, if you were to count all those little numbers out, it would be 35 splines, in which, if you're curious, we'll talk about it later. But this, I counted out the splines to verify that there is in fact 35, and everything was jiving, but we'll get into that later. And this right here is from a front diff, from a Dana 60, but it is just an open differential, and there is no locking mechanism whatsoever, as you can see. So it's just an open differential, and basically I don't think anybody would ever want that, but I do have it listed for sale just in case somebody happens to need an open diff, which they're not bad. It's just, I don't really understand the point of having a truck and having an open diff. Well, obviously for street applications it makes more sense, and that's what I'm going to get into. Now, these two basically do the same thing. They do it in different ways though, because this one is a automatic situation where there's some sort of clutch pack. You can kind of see it back here. Let me see. Sort of. You can't really tell, but if you've seen what I could see and how it unbolts, you would know that it's just unnatural for a diff to have that sort of loadout. If you were having an open diff, you would expect it to be like this, just kind of closed off, simple, pressed in, nothing fancy. So when I pulled it out, I was actually kind of surprised when I started seeing clutch packs, because I thought it was an open diff, but if I would have read the tag, I would have known that it was a limited slip from the factory. And this one is a electronic locking from the factory, and this one has a computer that monitors the wheel speed, and if it senses it go over 20 miles an hour, it will open up the locker, and if the locker is engaged and you're under 20 miles an hour, this magnetic solenoid, which is right here, it actually will suck in. Can't show you on camera, but it does suck in. When you apply 12 volts to the terminal leads, it'll suck itself in and lock the differential, spinning both leads at the exact same speed, and then it will unlock over 20 to keep you from causing some serious damage to your truck. But I don't really think that's what people are doing, but whatever the case is, that one does it electronically, this one does it mechanically. Now this one over here, the air locking one, it's not electronic and it's not mechanical. It's sort of a hybrid in a way, but it's just basically you hit a switch which turns on a pneumatic solenoid, which pressurizes 100 psi into the diaphragm, piston, whatever is inside of that component, and it locks up the axle. Basically doing what we're talking about, which is getting the rear wheels to spin at the same speed regardless of which one has more traction. So yeah, that's the long-winded version of the whole situation, but the big situation is where I found myself into, which is the axles. And if you can see, I basically marked all the axles and then I rotated it and then I counted how many teeth. And as you can see, that's how many teeth are there. So one is 35 and one is 37. So how do I know that? Because I counted. And I'm very disappointed because I thought they were the same, but I was made a mistake and I did not realize that I had bought a Dana axle and not a Sterling axle. And if you look at the axle shafts, you'll notice one is longer than the other, and the easiest way to figure that out is the longer one goes to the Dana axle and the short one goes to the Sterling. And yeah, that's just short and sweet of it. So again, 36 spline, I believe, and 35. So they do not fit. They're different spline. I don't care what anybody says. I counted. It's just good to know because it'll make more sense later. So on the actual axles themselves, you'll notice the first thing is that the housing on the 2017 axle basically starts at a 4-inch diameter and then it necks down to about a 3.5, and the housing's much beefier. It's just way bigger. If you ask me, the pinion gear actually appears to be larger, and I know that change is due to gearing. Well, they're all pretty close in gearing. That one's 373, that one's 355, and these two axles are from F350s, but again, that is a Dana M275. This is the Sterling 10.5, 03, 2017. So they're completely different. The one thing I like about this axle, which at first I thought was ridiculous, is you have the ability to use a case spreader. Where on the Sterling, they didn't give you those ports, which, you know, you don't need a case spreader, but it definitely helps when you go to drop the diff back in. You don't have to whale it with a mallet. Besides the axle housing difference, like again, that one's a 3.5, and that one's like a 4 with a neck down. I believe the brakes are larger. I gotta go check that. But the other big thing I noticed is, and I don't know how I'm gonna solve this yet, is the wheel speed sensor. So that right there is the wheel speed sensor, which pokes out of the back of the case, and we're gonna walk back over to the differentials over there. There is a tone ring that goes back on the diffs after you change the gear or the diff, whatever, and that basically just allows the sensor to pick up and figure out how fast the rear end's traveling, and helps with basically the transmission to figure out its shift points. So again, this is long-winded, but important. That ring needs to go on that. But that, I believe, is larger. So I have a CNC mill on the way back over there. But if I don't CNC it myself, maybe I'll have somebody else that I know do it for me. And if I can just get an OEM ring gear and get it machined to be the right outer diameter, it should just go right around that diff. And besides that, there's a couple of differences in the internal of the axle, but that's unrelated to this video, but I'll just mention it. The bearings on the Dana are 2 different sizes, as well as the bolt head caps. The bolts that actually hold the caps onto the bearings. One side is like a 7/8, the other side's like a, I don't know, like a 5/8 or something. And the bearings are different size too. So that's important to note, where that one, the Sterling axle, bearings are exactly the same on both sides. Nothing out of the ordinary. Bolt heads are the same exact size. Pretty basic stuff. I'm gonna basically try my hardest to stay with the Dana M275 axle from the 2017, because I just feel like it's a better axle, despite there is some controversy around it, I guess I've been reading, but overall I think I'd be better off just figuring out how to make it all